I'd like to thank everyone for the calls this week. As you were reading our Facebook, I got a lot of calls this week telling me they were praying for me. I've dealt with 5 deaths this week and 3 major surgeries. So it's been a rough week. It's one of those weeks when you think, God, why am I a pastor? You know, it's just been a tough week, and I appreciated the calls. People would see the prayer requests on Facebook. Now next week, keep praying. Everybody stay well. Because John's on vacation, and so is Laura. So I'm going to need everything to stay calm this next week. In Matthew 7:21, Christ was ending his Sermon on the Mount when he said to the people, "Not everybody who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those persons who do the will of my Father who is in heaven." The true test of our sincerity is not in what we say, but in what we do, and what we put feet to our words about. Christ did not say to anyone in Matthew 5:47, "What are you saying more than others are saying?" No. He said, "What are you doing more than others are doing?" In John 13:17, after teaching his disciples about humility when he washed their feet, he said, "Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." Words actually have no value whatsoever unless we accompany them with action. We have to do something about what we're saying. And this is what Christ was trying to teach us in the parable of the 2 sons. This was spoken at Christ's last visit to Jerusalem before his death. And he had just driven all the buyers and sellers out of the temple. And I can just imagine the power of God in his voice when he challenged them for turning the temple into a place for vending everything. And he had driven them out, and he had declared, "My temple shall be called a house of prayer. And you've turned it into a den of thieves." Now, in the scripture that was read in Matthew, the chief priests and elders returned to the temple, and they heard rejoicing from those people who had been healed. And he heard the children singing, "Hosanna, Hosanna to the King." But you know, they were still prejudiced. They were still against Christ, even though they'd seen what he'd done. And the very next day, Christ is back in the temple, and he's teaching all who would listen to him. And the chief priests and the Pharisees and the elders walked in, and they wanted to know, "Who gave you the authority to say and do these things?" They had seen his power. They had seen heaven's authority in his face, probably, as he had done the things that God had wanted him to do. And they were seeing that they just could not resist this power that was drawing the people to him. And the people could not resist it. They were all coming to it. His miracles had given evidence of his authority, but they did not really want the evidence. They wanted Christ to proclaim himself as that Messiah, that earthly king that was going to come and release the Jews from the occupation of Rome, to overthrow the Roman government and have an earthly king in their place. And they knew that if he tried to do that, they would destroy his influence, because they knew he couldn't stand up to the Roman army that was there. But they were certain if they could just get him to do that, then they could get him out of their hair. He would be away from them and leave the churches alone. But Jesus knew about their pompous, ritualistic, religious attitudes and ceremonies, their self-inflated egos, and that they could not even recognize God in him or see his miracles as an evidence of his divine nature. He evaded their issue with his response. and literally turned the tables on. When he said to them, let me ask you a question. You know, they didn't like that. Not one bit. Because he did that to them all the time. He said, if you answer me, then I'll tell you who gave me my authority and how I am doing these things. John's baptism, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or was it from mankind? Now the priests and elders were a little irritated and perplexed for him to be questioning them. You have to remember in this day and time, the elders and the chief priest pretty much ruled. What they said went. And how dare him do such a thing to them? After all, they had all the answers. So how dare him challenge them? But when they realized that Christ had turned the tables on them and was putting them on the spot, they knew they were in serious trouble.